Well, good afternoon, everybody. Kurt and I have got booming voices, so we'll try to hold this down low enough that we're not blasting everybody out of the room. It's nice to see everybody here on a Saturday afternoon. I can't imagine this many people want to hear about mountain pine beetle. Some of you must have thought you're in the wrong room here, And you know what? It's going to be a depressing talk. How many want to spend an afternoon hearing that, trees are going to die? But that's what we're going to do for you this afternoon. So we all may want to meet at a bar afterwards, all right, just to kind of finish up the afternoon and go through things. But before we start, now, Kurt Allen and I have been doing mountain pine beetle talks since 1999, all right? This infestation started, this current one, in about 1997 when Kurt and I were up on spearfish, I think it was, we were looking at. And so, we got the word out, this is going to build, this is going to get bigger. 99, we were doing workshops all across the hills here on it, and we've been doing them ever since. And it's amazing, we'll get calls. People call us up, do you know there's a mountain pine beetle problem in the hills? Oh, we didn't know that. That's good to know. Yeah, thanks for letting us, keep us in the loop. All right, so it's been around a long time, and because of that, Kurt and I cannot imagine that there's people here that don't know about mountain pine beetles. So you know what? We're going to start out with a quiz. All right. Oh, see, and you sat in the front row, and you're exempt. All right, front row's exempt. All right, you have immunity. All right. All right. So, just a show of hands. We're going to pick on people because I can already see people looking like this. He didn't see me. He didn't see me. I teach, so I'm used to those looks. But show of hands. How many people here think the mountain pine beetle is native to the Black Hills? How many people think mountain pine beetle is native to the Black Hills? Show of hands. How many people? Ooh, I'd say maybe almost half. Okay, that half is correct. It's always been here. All right, it's been here as long as there's been pine trees. But the reason I mention that is we have a number of people that think it just came in. Well, it did, but you came in later. All right, so it's been here a long time. Very good. All right, next question. All right, I'm going to ask you how many flight periods we have with beetles. In other words, how many times does the beetles come out during the year? How many people believe there's only one flight period a year? Okay. All right.
Am I supposed to? Oh,
you keep your hand down. Okay. You can't guess. How many people think two? Believe two. How about three? You got one. It's one. See, we hear that people say, well, there's two, or there's three, or there's five. Nope. There's only one. All right, next question. Now we're going to go to control. If I have an infested tree, can I spray it with pesticides that keep the beetles from coming out? How many people think I can spray a tree that's already infested to keep the beetles from coming out? Show of hands. Ooh, what a good group. Yeah, I'm happy with that one, because you can't.
We're about done.
We're about done. I'm happy with that. You folks got that right. You can't spray anything on the tree, all right, to keep them from leaving. You can spray it to keep them from coming in. So, not a bad. We didn't want to go far, but we want to start out with a little quiz, and we are going to start out with mountain pine beetle. But as Greg said, this is the deluxe version. We're going to go over a number of other things which do relate to it as well. So, the first thing I got to tell you right now on mountain pine beetle, and this relates to it, is do not, other than that beetle site that Greg mentioned, do not go on the internet for information on mountain pine beetle. And I'm serious. Do not go on the internet for information on mountain pine beetle. All right, now most of you are old enough to know that you can put anything you want on the internet, and most of it's wrong. And there's some great sites on the internet that look pretty, but have completely false information. But the other thing, you might be going to what you might think is a legitimate site, Oregon State University or something like that, and get information, and it's right for Oregon, but it's not right for here. So the first thing I want you to look at is, here's the little mountain pine beetle, and it is kind of small, but this picture here, that shows the natural range of mountain pine beetle. Found from northern Mexico all the way up to British Columbia, all the way over almost the coast of California to, this little dot, peninsula of South Dakota. And if we were doing this presentation in the 1950s, Kurt and I would be talking about not the mountain pine beetle, the Black Hills beetle. And it was in the 60s that it was lumped together with the mountain pine beetle. All right? Our beetle's different. It does operate just a little bit differently than the other beetles. It is close enough that we can understand why the people that do taxonomy decided to lump them together and call them a bark beetle. But there's enough differences out there that if you go on the internet, you are going to get some incorrect information. And so it's always best, if you're looking for mountain pine beetle information, I think the only portal you want to use is the website that Greg mentioned, so that you're getting information that is local, that's adapted to the Black Hills. Because I'll let Kurt mention the one on the 2 life cycles here. Now, where does that occur, Kurt?
Sure, and if you look at the map, I better hold that down too. I'm loud too, but if you look at it, about where we are in South Dakota, south through Colorado, Arizona, New Mexico is what used to be split off as a separate species. The more northern and western parts used to be what was called a mountain pine beetle originally, before they lumped them all together. And there is evidence, and they have found 2 generations a year, 2 flights a year in Idaho, Montana, Oregon, places like that, farther west. We have never seen that here. We've seen beetles, you know, they fly. We've seen mountain pine beetles flying in May. We've seen mountain pine beetles flying in November. They are not really part of the main flight. They're more stragglers or things that aren't really in the big infestation period. But, I mean, because, you know, and you look at that range, and across that range, what is one species, mountain pine beetle, infests all the different pine trees, all the different pine species across that range. And there's literally got to be well over 20 different pine species that they infest. And, you know, this is going to come into play, and we'll get to it later when we talk about management of the beetle. A wide geographic range, a wide host range, and all those things come into play. And so the beetle just behaves very differently here than it does across a lot of the rest of its range. We're not used to having to trade microphone back.
It's going to be tough, but we'll make it work. We're going to trip once. You can just count on that. You know, how many slides before one of the guys get caught? Well, the other item, too, is that's a real little bug. You know, it fits on the head of a pencil, size of a match. You know, it's tiny, all right? But everybody also asks, you know, how could something like that really be a problem? Well, it is. I mean, it has killed millions of pines since this current epidemic started back in the late 1990s. And here's a great example. We're going to come back to this. I want you to all look at that picture. What you're looking at is Harney Peak. Now, I'm standing on top of Little Devil's Tower in CSP, Custer State Park. And this is back 2004. Do you see these little pockets of mountain pine beetles? See where the trees have red and yellow tops? Now, if you go out and see these pines, as you can see all along the hills with the red and yellow tops, at this point today, we don't care about those trees. The beetles have come and gone. All right, they're not there anymore. They're in other trees. We'll show you those. But that gives you an indication where it was. All right? Mountain pine beetle is a very, very, very poor flyer. We'll talk about it in more details later, but it doesn't fly very far if it doesn't have to. And so where you have a pocket of dead trees, infested trees, that pocket gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And in fact, you can see anywhere from a 4 to 8-fold increase. You have 8 dead trees, the next year you can have 60 dead trees. The next year you can have 450 dead trees. You know, the next year you can have 3,500 dead trees. See how that expands? So that's that hillside in 04. Now we're going to spin the clock 6 more years. It's all dead. The only green you see in there are spruce trees. All right, now that's in the Black Elk where they do not manage. Right, it's set that way. So it wasn't a mistake. But it gives you an idea that if you don't do anything, which is the whole point of having everybody here at the meeting today, that it's like most things, little problems are easily solved, big problems are not. And the sooner you can get on here and start managing the mountain pine beetle, and that's what Kurt and I are going to be talking about today, as well as the other problems that occur out there, the better success you have. But once it gets to that stage, there's nothing left to it. That's what we call the dead zone. Well, how long has the mountain pine beetle been here? You know, as we mentioned already, it's been here as long as there's been pines, thousands of years, in fact. If you take a look at the old pictures, you can find it. In fact, the biggest infestation that ever occurred out here was in the 1890s. In fact, I learned about that when I was in college. It was so big. Not that I was in college in the 1890s, you understand, all right? Though my students would have just sat there and gone, oh yeah, that makes sense, all right? But it was so big of an infestation, I mean, it's in all the entomology books because they lost billions of board feet during that big outbreak. And we've had them since then, so it's not a new problem. But there's been the outbreaks. And kill trees is a relative scale. You know, we don't want you to focus on that. But it gives you a proportional. And look, back in the 1890s, really blew up. And then we had the 1940s. It blew up. And then we had in the 60s and 70s, it blew up. Some of you may remember that one. And now it's blowing up again. Now, can anyone here tell me, because this is a great group, how come after the 1890s blow up, we didn't have one pop up until, geez, almost 40 years later? What a group. What a group. You've heard this before, right? All right. You know, you're all our groupies. Follow us from program to program. The answer was because there weren't a lot of trees. And the problem is, not that we have too many beetles, and please understand I'm saying this tongue-in-cheek, but we have too many trees. The thing that drives mountain pine beetle, unique from other insects, is stand density. Lots of pines, lots of beetles. All right, you know, it's not related to climate. Doesn't matter if it's hotter, colder, dry, or wetter. All right, doesn't matter if the trees are stressed. What matters are there a lot of trees. And if you go back to historical records, back in the 1870s, when some foresters came out here and actually measured trees, they were disappointed in the Black Hills. They said, you'll never export timber from here. There's not enough. They said half the hills was open. I mean, there was dense stands here, no question. But nevertheless, it was far more open. And so when you get dense stands, you get beetles, and you can see where that cycle goes. You let it build up, it's going to hammer it down. Now, it wouldn't be bad if it just came out there and individually took out trees here and there, would it? But when it gets started, it doesn't stop until most of the trees are gone. You want to mention what the other connection is? Probably not? Okay.
No, we're going to let that one go.
Oh, no. We haven't figured it out yet, but somebody else in the audience last time said this relates to Republican administrations, and we thought, I don't know if we figured that one out yet, so I don't know.
That's why we were letting that one
Didn't go, you know, but what the heck, let's just get it out here so someone's going to say, see, it's all the problem of those Republicans. All right? But what caused the current epidemic then? I mean, you know, you're already getting the answer. What caused the current epidemic? Oh, what a group. Too many trees. You know, back in the mid-2000s, I had to sit in one of those congressional things, which is a total bore. And, you know, they said, well, Dr. Ball, you know, what's the current epidemic for them, you know? And, well, too many trees. And one of the other speakers up said, well, Dr. Ball, I'd have to disagree with you. And he was an attorney, so I said, who are you to disagree with me? I won't practice law. You don't tell me about beetles, was my response to him. But he said, well, it's global warming. No, it's not. Seriously. We have this infestation started during the wet period. It built during the dry period. It's been wet recently, hasn't it? It's still going on. All right, so the problem is, it's really the fact that we have a lot of trees. Now, temperature. Winter cold. We always get people asking that. Well, you know, was it cold enough to kill the beetles? No. What you need are days, several days, consistently never above minus 35. Never, yeah, you know, and we're not counting wind chill here, people. We need, 2 days.
We need, what they have found is we need probably a minimum of 48 solid hours of never getting above 35. Once it gets to
minus 30.
minus 35, yes. Once it gets to about from December through February, March. I mean, and is that impossible? No, it's probably not impossible here. It's a pretty darn depressing thought. Even even if you don't like bugs, that's probably a pretty. Those would be depressing days if that really happened. The one place, if you look at the graph here, that we can get some effect from cold temperatures are in the fall, like this time of year, and it still has to get
minus 15.
It still has to get well colder than normal, but not to the real extreme cold levels. Or again in the spring, in April and early May, because at this time, like this time of year, the small beetles, the larvae, have hatched out and have started feeding under the bark of the tree, and so they're active and everything else. And if we get a real cold snap now, and again, much colder than normal, they'll be affected and it'll kill most of them. And again, in the same thing in the spring when they start feeding again and are active. Once we get into the dead of winter, the beetles under the bark, and they have been here far longer than we have. They're far better adapted to the Black Hills than as far as surviving than we are. When we get into the middle of winter, they basically take all the water out of their body and replace it with a form of glycol, basically a form of antifreeze. I mean, that's why it has to get to those just brutally cold temperatures when we get there to kill them.
Essentially, they drink heavily. Again, but the real problem again is the fact that we have dense stands. Now, here's an interesting thing. Back in the early 2000s, late 90s, in fact, when we said the beetles are coming, the beetles are coming. The state had a program that was helping landowners thin their land. Because what's the best way to forestall it? Thin your lands, all right? Reduce stand densities. Now let's ask the question, why? Can anyone tell me why thinning your stands, thinning your forest, opening up so you got more space between your trees or among all your trees is going to make it less susceptible to the beetles? Oh, listen, what a group. Yeah, we're just going to send you out to give talks after this, because the answer is what we heard is mumbling through here. There's really two factors, and the one we expected everybody to say, and we heard some say, well, it's going to improve the health of the trees because they're better able to defend themselves. And that's correct, because they got to work their way into a tree, and a tree's going to try to work their way out by pitching them. But the other one, I was so happy to hear it, is that if we open up the stand, we get more turbulent air in there, don't we? And this beetle's a very poor flyer, about 4 miles an hour. It doesn't fly at 5 miles an hour, 6 miles an hour. It's being carried at that point. And so when you open up the stand, they're not flying where they want, they're being carried wherever. And also, they release a chemical, a pheromone, to attract beetles to attack a tree. If the air is still, that pheromone kind of stays in space, doesn't it? If the air is turbulence, where does that go? It disperses. And so when we say open up stands, it's more than just because we're going to increase the health of the trees that are remaining. All right? We're also going to create conditions that are less conducive to the beetles. So it's the 1-2 punch, and that's why the best thing to do, and wouldn't you agree, the absolute best thing to do is thin your land.
Yeah, and we'll get more into the whole management thing as we go through here, but there's basically two tactics. One of them is prevention, and one of them is suppression. One of them is trying to reduce the probability of getting the mountain pine beetle in the land. That's your prevention, or prevent it from killing a tree. That's prevention. Suppression is killing bugs. I mean, that's when we're out there killing beetles. And the prevention end is always going to be far more effective, especially on a big scale, than the suppression end.
Well, and we already asked this question. A lot of you got it right. How many flight periods are there for the beetles? There's one. For the mountain pine beetle. We'll talk about some other beetles where it's a little bit different later on this afternoon here. But you can see they do start, and they'll start in May. You'll get a couple beetles. The last beetle I caught last year was November, I think 6th or 8th. I can't remember which. All right, the beetles that are out early and the beetles that are out late are what we refer to as loser beetles. All right, they were the ones that you never invite to parties. All right, you don't let them come to you. And the reason why is they're out by themselves. How are they going to kill a tree by themselves? They're not. The tree's going to kill them. And so we're not worried about those early ones flying out there or those late ones flying out there. We're worried about the ones that come out and mass attack trees. And really that peak of that flight is just before rally. Beetles and bikers go together, all right? When you start, I know, all right. Yeah, and we're not blaming the bikers, all right? But there is a connection. I mean, Harleys, I don't know. We could try different motorcycle brands and see what happens, all right? All right, but good study. Kawasaki's are not attracted to. But the problem is that when you start noticing more bikers coming in, you can say, oh, you know what? Yeah, the Beetles ought to be flying now. And just before Rally Week is when they're flying a lot. And as the bikers are leaving, so are the Beetles. They're kind of fading out. And that's happened for a long, long time, but it's that one peak flight. And so really end of July through August are the time periods where we have the peak flight. Now, are they still out there killing trees in early September? Absolutely. But not as many. You know, right now, if you go out, you've pretty much seen everything that's going to happen this year. There could be an occasional one still coming, but nevertheless, most of the attack has already been done. So let's go over the life cycle very quickly here. And we're going to start with the adult leaving a dead tree. The beetle has to attack a live tree because its young has to feed on living tissue. It kills the tree as part of that process, and it leaves a dead tree. Okay, so it's got to have a living tree, and it's going to leave a dead tree. So when they leave, at that point, Kurt and I aren't even worried about that tree anymore, because once they leave, it's no longer a home for mountain pine beetle, is it? Those red-top trees you see out there, okay, that's where it was. And the trees that are gray, well, that's where it was a couple of years ago. So we're not worried about that. But they leave their dead host. But the interesting thing, if you pull the bark away in July, you'll find the adults underneath it. They're not coming out yet. Why? Why aren't they coming out yet? Because the bikers haven't arrived yet. People are listening to us. I like. All right, when we get a certain number of Harleys in here, that's what it's that motor sound, all right.
You know what's going to show up tomorrow?
I know. The governor's going to get, John Ball doesn't like bikers. John Ball does. Anyway, all right, but take a look at that. They're all piling up underneath that bark, and they haven't taken off yet. Why? Come on, you know the answer. Because they have to mass attack trees, right? If you fly out by yourself, how are you going to kill a tree? And we don't know what communication they use to tell everybody today's the day. Go. But remember, it's mass attack. That's the whole thing this beetle relies on, mass attacking a tree. So if I say, hey, it's a nice day, I'll go out, and you fly to a tree, you're not going to be able to kill it. But if you come out in a large group, so it's very common, you'll find a bunch of them underneath there, and they hang around for a bit, and eventually they come out. There they are. And in fact, here's one that landed on me. All right, it was attacking me. All right, and it's a real poor flyer. See those big bars there? That's a elytra. Those are wing covers. Those are not wings. The wings are underneath there. All right, they are really poor. I've seen them hit trees and bounce off. I mean, seriously, they are that poor flyers. But 4 miles an hour, they're fine. They can motor along. They'll go several hundred feet, or yards even, and they'll find a new tree. You get stronger winds, they're not flying, they're being carried. And if the air is very turbulent, they can be carried up into the canopy. Now, here's something we've got to mention right now, and probably mention again, because when we've talked about treatments, we're going to be talking about cutting and chunking and dropping trees and letting them lie. And we found out some people thought the reason that works is since the beetles are poor flyers, people are getting that message that they can't take off from the ground, that they have to fall out of the tree and build up airspeed as they're dropping. No, they're not that sophisticated. They can go from a standing start from this table. So none of our treatments are based upon the fact that they're such poor flyers they can't fly off the ground. They can, but the point we're trying to make very clearly is they are not very good flyers. And so really most of them, and it's always been given as about 80%, and I think that's reasonably true, are going to be found within several hundred feet of where they came out of, assuming there's live trees there. So again, managing around those infestations is so critical because that's where your new beetles are going to occur. You all see things like this, haven't you, where you see the gray trees, and surrounding the gray trees are the red trees, and surrounding those are going to be the green infested trees. Because again, those pockets get bigger and bigger and bigger. And one of the things Greg's going to be talking to you about a little later on today is some of the cost share programs. What are those designed to do? They're designed for suppression. You go out there, you found the trees are infested right now, and you're taking care of those. Why? So you keep that population from increasing the following year and getting bigger. All right? It's not eliminating the population, it's reducing it. However, we occasionally get this, and this is almost the mythical behavior.
And so you give it to me. Yeah. Thanks. And so, really we see expansion is generally around where the beetles were last year. So where we're seeing the red trees this year is more than likely where you're going to find the green trees. Now, there's always some that move. And again, they're not flying, but they get basically lifted up into above the canopies and into the jet stream and up in the air and can be transported by the air mass for long distances, up to 100, 150 miles, I mean even. And, we had some discussions this morning with some folks. We think they're getting some into the panhandle of Nebraska that way from Wyoming and Colorado. This particular picture, whatever here, is a radar image, much like a Doppler radar image. And this is from British Columbia, Canada, a few years ago, the folks in Canada have had a long, huge, massive mountain pine beetle outbreak. And this is a radar image of actually a group, a herd, a whatever they call them, passel of beetles that has been taken aloft. And there's enough beetles in that mass that it actually got picked up on radar, much like a thunderstorm. Now, I don't know how many beetles that is, but you saw how little they were, fit on the head of a pencil. I'm guessing a lot. Okay, that's where I'm going to guess is a lot. And, some of the stuff they've seen in British Columbia, I mean, and the thing is with these, they're kind of being dispersed. I mean, they're not guiding where they're going. They're on the basically being carried along on the wind. And if they get too high up, at some point they kind of fold up their wings because they get too cold, and they just sort of drop out of the sky like little parachuters or whatever. Skydivers. And they just drop, and it's sort of a crapshoot for them at that point. That because they don't know where they're going to drop out. They could drop out in a cornfield. They could drop out in a wheat field. They could drop out in a pine forest if they're lucky. I've seen some of the pictures from British Columbia where, there's literally like a 6-inch layer of dead beetles ringing around the edge of a lake because they dropped out at the wrong place in the middle of the lake. They all died there, drowned, and it's like instead of a fish kill, it's a beetle kill or whatever there on the lake. But it's a very rare occurrence. It is really, they are being dispersed. More than likely, when they get these long-range movements of them, they are not going to find, more often than not, they are not going to find a suitable place to attack. But it does happen, just so you know. And it gets out there once in a while. And this is one of those, it's out there every once in a while that they can move a long ways. Really, they can't. We want to look for the more local populations.
And that's why we try to emphasize where you have infested trees, the next year you can take that a 4 to 8 fold. And one of the things that Kurt and I have noticed, and it's just kind of an experience, but we've talked to others that have seen this as well, sometimes the small pockets, you got 1, 2, or 3 trees. And the next year it doesn't expand. Why? There were so few beetles there, they just dispersed. They couldn't mass attack. Okay? When you get the pockets, yes, sir?
You talk about this chunking them and leaving them.
Yeah.
And then like you say, they don't need to get up and fly. Can they just, like say, have you ever watched to see if they just take off and just walk over into another tree the whole tree?
You know what? The question was, have we ever seen them walk over to another tree? The day I ever did that, I'd probably be on Letterman as how much taxpayer money we're wasting. Man watches beetles walk. But no, they generally speaking are going to fly. They walk on trunks trees. And one example I've seen, and I'll show you.
Well, the only question I got is you say they're such bad flyers, but it seems like they follow each other pretty good, so they must be fairly good at flying.
Fairly good. They fly better than you or I. But it's in that still air that they have to fly. right? 4 miles an hour. Those, if you walk in these dense stands in the hills, the air's not moving that rapidly. And they're able to fly in that. Above that, they're being carried. And sometimes they're being carried together. But that's why you're going to see those pockets kind of expanding, because generally speaking, they're not going to be able to move that far. And they're not doing it by walking to the tree. They'll walk on the bark of the tree. But the point of the poor flyers, and we want to emphasize that point, but not to the point where everybody thinks these things can't fly at all, because they certainly can.
So you're talking, you want to make a joke about wasting money, but watching them, but how's this chunking program working now?
Oh, it's working great. He's asking about cutting and chunking. It works fantastic. Well, and I don't care, all right, because this isn't faith-based. I know it does work, all right, and, well, let me ask this. How do you know it doesn't work?
Because I did a bunch of it this winter, and I checked them trees the whole time, and the only way that it actually worked was if you took it, cut it, split it, and stacked it. Otherwise, them bugs were still alive.
Yep. And when did you check them?
Up until a month or 2 weeks ago, they were still alive.
Well, they would have been gone then. But here's the thing. We can cut and chunk, and I don't want to get ahead of the story too much, but since he asked the question, let's do so, is that you'll find the adults underneath there, or the larvae underneath there, at the same numbers you'll find them in standing infested trees. And we'll find that all the way into the summer. But what we have is far less emergence. In fact, yesterday, Kurt and I were up looking at some cutting and chunking, and we were even finding the dead adults. They're still in there, but they're dead. And are we killing every beetle with cutting and chunking? No, but we don't need to. If I kill 80%, I'm not going to have the pockets expand. And that's what we see with cutting and chunking.
Well, that's what I'm asking. How much of them are you killing? That's what I want.
80%.
So, but okay, the Forest Service guy I talked to told me that in order for this to work, if you want to chunk them, then you want to go back out and roll them over every.
Well, and again, and just so everybody understands it too, because again, I don't want to hold this question until the very end. But one of our treatments is for infested trees. You cut them, we cut them into about 2-foot lengths. And what happens there is that tissue dries out. And seriously, if you go out during early summer, you'll find a lot of beetles still in those cut and chunk pieces. Absolutely. But they'll die, enough of them die before emerging, that what we see is we don't get the expansion of the pockets. And that's what we're trying to do, right?
So you're saying that you're trying to kill like half of them so they don't have that mass to be able to...
We're correct. We're trying to kill enough of them so they cannot mass attack. We're not trying to kill them all. So that's why we know it works, because when we've done this, we don't get the expansion of the pockets. However, if you said, I want to kill even more, the reason some of them survive is most of the ones that survive are on the underside, because that's the shaded part. And one reason for the 2-foot lengths is you can go out there and kick it. And if you kick that at the end of May, all right, now the underside is on top and you're drying that out and you're heating it up and killing as well. But again, all our when we talk about all our treatments, and we'll come back to it now later on here, but we're not talking about eliminating the population. We're reducing the population, because again, the whole thing everybody's, I think, getting is, and you said it correctly, we're trying to reduce the population so they can't mass attack. Beyond that, we don't care if some beetles live. All right? That's what all our strategies are aimed at, is to reduce the population, not eliminate them. It'd be nice to eliminate them. We can't do that.
Dr. Ball, could you talk about timing? A lot of our programs are starting this fall now as opposed to last year we got started in the spring. Does that make a difference?
His question was on the timing, and it does, and I apologize, but if I start answering all those questions now, we'll just be a little out of sequence. So if you don't mind, I wanted to answer his because he had it right out there, but for the more details on the cutting chunking, we'll just get into it because it's like a story that builds. Yes, sir. Mm-hmm. That's that. Yeah. It's quite, and I have to repeat questions because this is being filmed too. So, and I'll also let everybody else hear it. But his comment was that down on the Pine Ridge, if if they're hauling trees out of the hills down there, if they're infested trees, you're carrying beetles with them. All right, and I want to do one little separation on that. If the beetles, because we'll talk about it later, but if the tree's been standing dead, if it's a red top tree, the beetles have left, you can cut that, make that firewood, you don't have any more threat. But yes, we don't want to see people moving green infested trees. Especially one of the problems we saw in the Rapid City area was people that were going out cutting in June infested trees, standing infested trees, not cutting chunk trees, standing infested trees, hauling that wood into Rapid City, into their place, and then wondering why their trees were being attacked. So firewood movement, thank you for bringing it up. We'll talk about that, is a key thing. Yes?
Why would you worry about firewood being moved when the loggers are transporting all those bug trees to the mill?
Oh, you know what? Her question was, why are we not moving firewood when the loggers are hauling all those bug trees to the mill? Believe it or not, that has been looked at. In other words, how many beetles are tumbling out of those logs as they're driving down the road? All right, 40 miles an hour, those babies are out of luck. And so if it was just you putting firewood and driving it up and down the highways, I wouldn't be worried in June and July. The problem with firewood is people stack it in one spot and it stays there until the next winter. Being hauled to the mill, and that was looked at as a concern. Gee, if we're hauling wood to the mill, are beetles going to be coming out of it as we're driving, almost the Pied Piper, if you will, and that was not a real issue. The other would be if you're stockpiling at the mill for a long time period, it could be, but usually it's processed very quickly. So that's the difference between firewood. Firewood, I'm not worried about the actual driving of the firewood to the site. What I'm worried about is when you get it and you stack the firewood, if you're stacking it in June, you're probably not going to burn it till that winter, which means you've now got August for those beetles to come out. So that's the difference. Good question. Yeah. But yeah, it was kind of funny. They had to look at, do they fly out of log trucks? The other thing is the beetle likes big trees. Loves big trees. Why does it like big trees? Good. Thicker phloem, thicker cambium. There's more food underneath there. All right, so the big trees now, one of the things we say 7 to 13, and I don't want people to walk away from here thinking, oh, they won't attack trees that are 16, 18, 20 inches. They certainly will. We just don't have a lot of those. Littler trees they'll attack, but only if there's nothing else to feed on. And if they're little enough, they won't even survive. There's just not enough food in them to get there. So it's those if you've got dense stands of 7 to 13 inch diameter trees, that's the preferred food for the beetle. Bigger trees, even more, but the smaller trees, not so much. Yes? Oh, good question. Dense stands, that's where having a forester come out and determine it, and we use basal area as a measurement. We're looking at cross-sectional area of the tree, and you'll often hear the term, we like 40 to 60 square feet per acre. In other words, 40 to 60 square feet of trunk per acre. An easier way may be to understand it, if you've got a stand of trees that are 8, 10, 12 inches in diameter, we're looking at about 25, 30 feet of space in between trees. All right? So if you said, well, you know what, I got trees that are about 10 inches in diameter and I've only got about 15 feet of spacing between my trees, that would be a very dense stand. And so you want to get them properly spaced. And again, the more open the conditions, the less conducive for the beetle. Well, once it gets to a tree, and what they do to pick out the tree, we don't know. But when they pick one out, again, it's not based upon that being a weak tree. It's not based upon that tree being damaged. It's based upon something else. We don't know. But they like it. And once they come in and like it, they call in all their other beetles to come in and attack it too. Why? Mass attack again. And if we kill enough of their little buddies, there's not enough of them to attack the trees. And so once they try to go in, the tree's trying to kick them out. And that's where you get those pitch globs, which we'll show you today. And you've got that white glob, that's where it's trying to work its way into the tree. And look at that. See the bubble gum? That's bad. But that's how they attack the tree. Mass attacking the tree, large numbers like that, so that the beetles can get in and they're not being pitched out. But, see that? Can you see the beetle in it? That's a loser beetle. It tried to get in, the tree pitched it out. And it stuck there. In fact, its little leg broke off too. All right, it's a dead beetle. All right, it had its one chance and didn't make it. And so what you'll often find if there's a few white globs, and they're typically white and they're big, and you'll find the beetle attached to them, that's called a pitch out. That was an unsuccessful attack. The thing I really want to caution everybody here is pitch outs are rare. We go to landowners and they have a tree that's just covered with pitch and they say, well, these are pitch outs, right? No, they made it. No, I'm sure these are pitch outs. No, you're wrong. They're not pitch outs. Can we just let them wait a year and see? No, because then they're motherships. All right, they're going to be releasing lots of beetles. And so pitch outs are not a very common item. I don't know if you want to mention anything on that, then I'll show the next one.
Yeah, where we are right now with the sheer number of beetles that we have out there, I mean, if you're seeing pitch tubes on there, 99.9% of them are successful attacks. We just got so many beetles out there right now that there are almost no pitch outs anymore. And even though we've had more rain and stuff the last few years, I mean, they're just, the trees have not caught up. There's too many beetles out there, and we are not getting the pitch outs. And, you know, we haven't seen this as much lately, but, you know, back in the early 2000s when it was a lot drier, we were seeing a lot of trees that were being attacked did not even produce any pitch tubes whatsoever. And, I mean, they were very small, very brown, if they had them at all. A lot of trees, when it was in those really dry years, I mean, you had nothing but a little, it looks like real fine brown sawdust called boring dust in the cracks of the bark or around the base of the tree. And that's all the trees were producing. They didn't have enough water, and they weren't even producing pitch. Now, at least the last, couple, 3 years, we have been seeing pitch tubes come back as we've gotten more water. But the beetles are up at such a level that even with the extra moisture, it's not helping.
And once they do get inside, Mom and Dad have this long gallery here, that long tunnel, and Mom lays her eggs. And then the larvae, the small worms, are going to start going out the side. Now, what's interesting is right now that's where they are in their life cycle. Like I say, they've already flown. Underneath some of our cut and chunks, we're finding adults, but they're pretty much dead. All right, they didn't make it. They're kind of moseying along. The ones that have already flown somewhere, okay, have gone in, laid the eggs, and now we're seeing just these very, very, very small side tunnels coming out. Because the larvae then are going to tunnel off the side. All right, here's their little egg galleries, and there's a larvae. The mature larvae is about the size of a grain of rice. That's how tiny they are. And they don't move very far, a couple of inches. But during that couple of inches, what are they doing? They're feeding through the phloem. That's separating the connection between the needles and the root system. So the tree's going to starve by having this damage. Look at how many you get underneath there. I mean, there's zillions of them. Question?
Yes, I know several people that had one year on the trees and they open up the area and put insecticide in there. Is there any value to that?
Oh, question was, they have a tree that has one hit, so they excise that and put some pesticide. No, I wouldn't recommend that as a treatment. It really wouldn't be effective. What I'd be thinking more of is if there's just a single hit on the tree, and there are no others, period. In other words, you look and it's not like they didn't produce pitch. There is none. Usually those are going to be big white globs of pitch, and the beetle just never really made it in. So the one beetle we're not worried about.
Well, this picture's up. I'll go back to your question about the cut and chunk. You know, we did a bunch of cut and chunk this year, and even as of, end of May, 1st of June, you pop one of those open, this is what it looked like. And those boys were all squirming. And by the end of June, I mean, it was almost barren in there. What we found, and just this year, and like I said, within the month of June, basically, it went from this, and I don't remember the exact numbers, but it was somewhere around 90% less. I mean,
Like I said, when I did it, you pulled off there like that.
oh yeah.
As long as it stayed in the sun, they just like evaporate.
Oh yeah, and it's just, when you bring that out, it's just amazing how, in 2 or 3 weeks' time, you go from literally hundreds of live beetles too. You know, almost nothing.
And the reason we're trying to emphasize this is somebody even made a video showing, see, this doesn't work. He shot the video in March. Well, of course, they're not dead yet. This is right up to the end. But I don't really care if it takes till June or July to kill them in there, as long as they don't emerge or don't emerge in large numbers. But you're right. I like the evaporate because you're absolutely right. Yeah, you can't find them then.
They're just like a little cotton ball under there once they're gone.
Yeah, nothing there. Fried beetles. Yum. Those were in the cookies, by the way. No. I'm kidding. Yes, sir.
Do the new adults ever stay in the tree and lay more eggs in the same tree?
Oh, no. In other words, when they come out, do they go back in the same tree? Okay. What's your question then?
I don't know what's obvious to them, that there may be enough cambium to
Oh,
support another life cycle.
no, there isn't. Great question, because it builds right into my slide. All right. His question was, well, you know, I've hatched. Mom and Dad attacked the tree. I've hatched. I'm kind of maybe some of you have those kids at home right now. They're in their 20s. You can't get them out of the house, you know. So, yeah, you know, they're under the bark there. They're saying, you know, Mom and Dad, I really just don't want to go out on my own. Now, this case they do it because Mom and Dad also bring a fungus, and it plugs up their room, so they got to move out. And so this is blue stain. That's a fungus. It's a 1-2 punch for killing the tree. When the beetles fly to a new tree, all right, as the adults, as they're burned in, they introduce a fungus. And we call that blue stain because it does blue the wood. Not sometimes quite this nicely, but I chose this picture because it's quite obvious, right? That blue stain fungus also plugs up the tree and helps kill it faster, right? And that's why that tree is absolutely dead, and there is not a chance to raise another generation in them.
There must be some point, though, where there isn't enough beetles to kill the tree. So they leave and the tree survives.
Well, actually, what will sometimes happen is they'll try to get into the tree, they'll live part of their life cycle out and just be killed by the tree, the sap flow of the tree itself. So it's not like they'll, a partial attack, they'll live and emerge. They're just, generally speaking, killed.
Some trees have this strip.
Yeah, strip attacks. Yeah, we'll show you that here in a bit, too. Just so we're getting ahead, he's talking about an unusual attack where it's just running up and down. Yes, ma'am.
You, earlier were saying that once a tree is attacked, that somehow there seems to be like an all-fall.
Yeah.
And so they would focus, if they can make it there, to that tree, whereas, like, we have 2 trees on our property right now. And I'm looking and saying, why those 2?
Yeah.
But that would explain why they concentrated. Does it mean that the other trees didn't get hit at all, or that it was just such a light hit?
No. No, her question was she has a couple trees that were hit, and were the other trees just lightly hit, so you can't really see it, or not hit at all. Most likely, again, this beetle relies on the fact that we've got to mass attack a tree to kill it. All right, so that we're going to be successful. Our young are going to make it, and everybody lives. And so it's a fairly efficient system. What we don't know, and no one does, is why they choose that one particular tree. Part of what they do, it's based upon I'll say the odor, but what the tree emits as well. And they can pick up a chemical signal from a tree that says, you know what, you're going to be a slightly better victim than the next one. And if we could figure that out, that'd be great. Yes, ma'am.
So with a lightning strike that weakens the tree, and that seems to...
You know, good point. She says, well, a lightning strike that weakens the tree. And you know what? During endemic populations, in other words, the beetle's always here. You know, in the mid-'80s, where would you find it? Lightning strike trees. Trees are slightly stressed. But once the population builds up, they'll attack anything. And why they choose a particular tree then, we're not sure. But yeah, during other times they will. But here's the thing with the blue stain. And this is really important. This is why you always want to go to that site. Beat the beetles. Now, you know what? I'm old enough that back in the 60s, that had a whole different term, all right? But beatthebeetles.com. And the reason why is you'll get good information there. Go anywhere else, it should be for entertainment only, because you're going to find some websites out there that we got sent to us that, you know, oh, somebody's got a magical solution, all right? that's always being suppressed by the government, we're bored, that will kill the fungus. And if they kill the fungus, then the tree will survive, and because the beetle feeds on the fungus. The beetle doesn't feed on the fungus. The beetle carries the fungus in there to kill the tree. It doesn't feed on it at all. You can't just kill the fungus. It's not going to work. Yes, sir.
Yeah, if I get this straight, besides procreation or survival of the species, its purpose in life is to kill a tree.
The beetle? Yep. I mean, and it's killing the tree because that's how it survives. And the reason why, it's kind of interesting, bugs do this sort of stuff, but if the tree kept on living, it might kill off enough of your young that they don't make it. But if you can get inside that tree and start shutting it down, so you're just keeping it alive enough to something to eat, all right? But you're going to kill it in the process. That's the perfect way to get all your young to survive. It's a beautiful system when you think about it from the beetle standpoint. But they do rely on the blue stain fungus. And by the way, the two are always found together. Always found together. Yes, sir.
Just down the road here at Pester, not too long ago, they had a crop duster that came in.
Oh, yeah.
Spray. Can you touch on that?
Probably not. He's asking about the crop duster who came by and sprayed. Do you want to address? Yeah, go ahead. Remember, this is film.
Thanks. And my understanding, and I don't know the full story of it. I really don't. What I heard and what I got out of it was basically someone selling this theory. It was a fungicide to kill the blue stain fungus. And unfortunately, by the time someone called me and I said, no, that's pure lunacy, it will not work, they had already done it. But it won't work. And and we're coming into more of the management stuff, but one of the things that you need to be very considerate of right now is with this sort of thing, with the epidemic we got going on, and we've seen it down in Colorado, we've seen it in other places where this has happened. There are a lot of people who are trying to sell a lot of solutions, and if it sounds too good to be true, it probably is. More than likely, it probably is. I won't say there are no real easy solutions to this, but there really aren't. And again, we'll get into it a little more. There's nothing we can spray aerially. Flat out, there's nothing that can be applied aerially.
And some of us wish we could. I remember the 70s. We used to fly over everything. You'd have your house out there. We'd fog your house. It's probably why I'm bald today. But, most people wouldn't want to spray it. And you know what? Those chemicals we used to do, they can't do them anymore. We'd have five-headed people walking around here. So, question in the back? Yes, sir.
Back in the 80s and stuff, we used to do it a lot. We did a lot of cut and burn.
Yes.
You guys ever?
Yep. You're about 5 or maybe 10 slides ahead of us. So, cut and burn. Yes, sir. Oh, good question. How many does mom and dad produce? Now, by the way, dad's a pretty crappy dad. All right, he doesn't hang around and take care of them at all. He just kind of goes into a tunnel and just dies. All right, his function in life is over. All right, mom about 80 eggs. All right, so she has a big family. Takes care of them by herself. Actually, she doesn't do anything either. She just lays the eggs and says you're on your own. Yes, sir. Mm-hmm.
Split them, and I took the time to put the bark up.
Wow.
Every one of them. Okay? This year, I end up with about 6 or 7, maybe 100 feet away from that
Oh, okay.
location. But I didn't have any other in this
Yeah.
area.
Yeah.
Now I got 7 more.
Yep. That would be normal. I don't know if you heard him, but what he did is, he did everything just about perfect. He had 24 trees, and again, with 24 trees, you leave 24 trees, you can often have a 200-tree blowout then, all right? And what happens, he cut them and chunked them, split them as firewood, laid the bark side up, and about 100 feet away, did you say, or 100 yards? 100 feet.
100 feet.
Yeah.
150 feet.
150 feet, he ended up with 6 more. That's not uncommon. You'll always have a few popping up. Yeah.
So now I'll get the rest next year.
Yep, you'll get that. You'll knock it down even further.
The rest of the Forest Service don't take care of theirs.
We're not going into that today, all right? This is not beat up Kurt day, all right? Well, now we have the adults emerging again. Yeah, all right, we've been through that before. The adult's emerging and the cycle starts again. Again, it's a 1-year life cycle for this beetle, and it's coming out of a dead tree. By the way, the mountain pine beetle is not the only beetle in the tree, or could be the only beetle in the tree. We have turpentine beetles that tend to attack about the lower 3 feet of the trunk. Then from about 3 to 20, 30, 40 feet, possibly, you have mountain pine beetles. And then at the top and in the branches, you have pine engraver beetles. And they all vary on size, too. The mountain pine beetle attacks in this size here, down to where the trunk's about 5 inches in diameter. Because when the trunk's smaller than that, there isn't enough of that cambium phloem for that beetle to really feed on. But the ips can feed on smaller stuff. And it's important to be able to know these 3 so you don't misidentify the beetles. I'll talk on this one, Kurt, and then I'll let you have the next slide here. But the pine engraver beetle typically attacks slash. You can find it, and it gets this little boring dust there. And they create kind of this interesting Y-shaped tunnel.
And the thing with, the pine engraver, it's closely related to mountain pine beetle. It's a much less aggressive beetle. Basically, for them to, like John pointed out, they attack slash. They attack fresh cut trees. They attack things like that. For them to attack a standing tree, I mean, it has to be a stressed tree. And whereas we said before, the weather, the hot, the dry, wet, cold, any of that doesn't really relate to mountain pine beetle. With Ips beetles, it really does. With the engravers, it does. When we have dry years, really dry, especially spring, is when they get going and can attack the standing trees. Okay. And the other one, we have, which is always found about 3 or 4 feet from the ground. It's never going to go much higher than that. It's called red turpentine beetle. And and again, all 3 of these beetles can be found in the same tree. But the turpentine beetle is like right at the very ground level. It is not it produces really, really big pitch globs. You will see turpentine beetle pitch globs. I mean, you can't miss them. They're about the size of a ping pong ball sometimes. And they're really red, and they've got a lot of really chunky wood pieces and stuff in there. But they're really easy to find. Oftentimes, the place I've seen them most, a lot of times see them most, is in construction zones when the pine trees get damaged because you're pouring a new driveway, cutting a new whatever. We see them a lot after fires. We see turpentine beetles attacking fresh cut stumps a lot of the time. I mean, although they're a slightly larger beetle than mountain pine beetle, they again are very unaggressive. Generally, we don't even consider them to be a tree killer. I mean, you get turpentine beetles, your tree's probably going to be all right and probably going to survive. And then we got, and these ones are kind of interesting. How many of you have seen the Longhorn beetles? Oh, yeah. Because, these ones, we pointed out the mountain pine beetle, about the size of the pencil lead, right? The Longhorn beetles, that one's about actual size, a wood borer. These are the ones that'll actually chew off a limb if you get too close. No, they're not. But they are much, much larger. And there's 2 basic kinds of wood boring beetles we have here in the hills. One of them, they're called the metallic wood boring beetles, and they're called that because they have a sort of metallic sheen to their body. They're actually very pleasant looking insects, very nice, colorful insects. A lot of them are greens and golds and things like that, and kind of shine and sparkle in the sun. The other one, which I'm sure most of you all have seen, are the Longhorn beetles, so-called because they got the real long antennae. The most common one is a black and white spotted or striped one. The metallic ones make, a lot of people describe it as a D-shaped exit hole. It's kind of flat on the top or oval shape or whatever you want to call that. The Longhorn beetles make a big round hole. You're never confuse any of these exit holes with those of mountain pine beetle or anything else. Much larger holes, much larger insect. The interesting thing is, that we have been, both John and I have been seeing, typically these are wood boring insects. They go in, they do feed in the phloem, but then these are ones that will actually chew into the wood, whereas mountain pine beetle, turpentine beetle, engravers are just going to stay right under the bark in that phloem area. These are the ones that will go in and chew into the wood and actually bore into the wood and chew holes in that. If you ever seen a piece that's really chewed up, it actually has a Swiss cheese look to it. These are the guys that cause that. And the interesting thing about it is they only feed on dead trees. And you know, typically we see them coming in after fires, you know, and even 2 and 3 years after fires. 2 and 3 years after mountain pine beetles killed a tree, they'll come in and start chewing on the tree, helping degrade it, really. I mean, they're attacking almost simultaneously with mountain pine beetle. I mean, they're maybe a week behind. I mean, because, you want to go ahead?
Yeah, I'll finish that. And you know what? That's a good thing. And here's why. As Kurt said, the wood borers don't attack live trees. I mean, we're not worried about them going out and attacking your stands. But they attack a tree that mountain pine beetles in it. And again, as he said, they're just starting to do that now. It used to be a year or two beyond. Or when we used to cut and chunk, they wouldn't enter those chunks until a year later. Now they're entering in chunks almost right away. And here's the good thing. They feed faster than mountain pine beetle. So they get into a tree, they feed on all the food before the mountain pine beetle can. And you know what they'll also do? They'll eat mountain pine beetles. Now, they're not after mountain pine beetles. I want to make that clear. But if they T-bone one as they're going through their tunnel and cross a mountain pine beetle, they won't stop and wait. They'll just chew right through it. And so we've pulled open trees now, and we're seeing more of them, where the mountain pine beetle didn't survive because the wood borers have essentially degraded the entire wood surface. And that, so in a sense, we're kind of happy with the wood borers because, yeah, the tree's dead. I mean, it was dead already. The mountain pine beetle attacked it. But you have less survival of the mountain pine beetle. Why? Because this thing will go in there and eat up all the food first. And so your young starve. And by the way, they'll eat your kids too. We also have a couple diseases that look very close, and this is important too. We were looking at this morning. This is called Dothostroma needle blight, and we've seen a lot of that in the hills this year. And it'll cause discolored needles in your trees. And some people say, oh, I've got mountain pine beetle. And no, they don't. What their trees are infected with is Dothostroma needle blight. Now, this is needle blight. It only affects the needles, doesn't affect the twigs. But this year we have all sorts of pines, ponderosa pines, where the needles have this banding to them. And the base is green and the needles are banded. Now, that can be due to a couple of things I want to point out. But one of the most common is Dothostroma, and this year there was a huge infection, probably because we had a very wet spring. And so if the problems are that the needles are discolored, what you're looking at there is a needle disease. The other one, and we're seeing lots of this, and Kurt and I were in Rapid City 2 days ago, whatever, last week maybe. And we went through one of the neighborhoods, Woodland Hills?
Up on Sheridan Lake Road.
Up in Sheridan Lake Road, close enough. And there had to have been a hail pocket going through there because all the trees were just covered with Diplodia, just covered with Diplodia. And what Diplodia does is it's a twig killer, and so you'll end up with twigs that look like this. The tips will be brown and dead. And if you're driving on Highway 16 outside of Rapid City, you'll see the same thing. As you're driving out there, you'll see all these trees with the tips that are brown and dying. All right, not further back, but this is Diplodia. Now, by the way, Diplodia, it used to be believed that you got the hailstorm in there that opened up the wood for infection, and the infection would come in and harm the tree. But now we know that the infection was in the tree already. The hailstorm just stressed the tree so that the disease took over. But nevertheless, it's a fairly serious problem. You'll see trees that look like this. See all those gray hanging needles? No mountain pine beetle in that tree whatsoever. But it's due to Diplodia, tip blight. And so it's important to realize that while we have mountain pine beetle out there, it's not the only problem that occurs out there on pines. And Diplodia can be a very serious disease on your ponderosa pines. And if you live in town and planted Austrian pines, it's equally serious on that. In fact, perhaps even more so.
Does it kill it?
The question was, will it kill it? It often doesn't kill the tree, though I think the ones we looked at over in Sheridan it certainly killed trees there. Generally speaking, it just makes the tree look so bad you just wish it would die. All right.
Does it come back?
Does the tree come back? It can, but now we're into individual tree management. If you have a tree that has diplodia on it, it can be sprayed, and that's what we recommended for the folks up in that hail pocket that had trees that were still look pretty good. That has to be a fungicide sprayed on the tips of the tree. So, I mean, if you've got a 50-foot tree, that sprayer's got to get up 50 feet. And you spray a fungicide in the spring when the needles are first coming out and about 2 weeks later. And if you do that for a couple of years, you can actually improve the health of the tree. It won't cure the disease, but you can improve the health of it. But doing something like that means, well, I'm treating a few trees around my home. But if you live out in the hills there and you say, boy, I've seen a lot of this, and you think back to, well, you were in that hail pocket. Or, for example, those hails we saw this summer that were pretty bad along here. I was driving through one of them or attempting to. We're going to, again, see this popping up about a year later on a lot of those trees, unrelated to mountain pine beetle. All right, so what do we do? Oh, question before we go on.
Wouldn't it be almost better to remove the tree because when it drops seedlings, then would those seedlings either not grow because they're not healthy, or would they grow bringing another disease?
Oh, okay, the diplodia. No, the question was, should we cut the tree down because its offspring might become diseased or that? No. The disease is so prevalent in the hills, that's not really an issue. So the seedlings will come up. Many will not have it. Some may end up with it. Well, what do you do? All right, you got mountain pine beetle out there, or you're worried about mountain pine beetle. I like this Ted's Tree Removal Service. Ted, generally the low bidder. Yep, is trained beavers there. Again, one of the things you want to watch for is price this year on things. So what can you do? How do you manage beetles? Well, remember, what's our first thing? Preventive. Reduce stand density. You're a beetle. Which side do you want to be flying in? All right, this side, right? Because this side you're flying. That side you're carried. All right, the more open the stand, all right, the better the conditions to improve the health of the tree, so they have more sap to overcome the beetle, and also so that their flight behavior is more effective. So opening up stands, and as we said, getting that space into 25, 30 feet between trees, and again, having a forester help you prepare that so you get the proper density. But as you're opening up that stand, that's going to provide conditions that are less conducive to the beetle. But a lot of you are here probably because you got beetle hit trees. Now you're in suppression. What are you going to do there? And again, we don't have any tools that eliminate beetles. No way are the two of us talking about beetle eradication. What we're trying to do is reduce numbers to the point that they are not going to mass attack. And the first thing to do is go out there and mark those infested trees. You can cut and burn them, and Kurt, why don't you talk about cutting and burning and then also the solar treatment, then I'll go over cut and chunking.
Excellent. And so we have in the past, and whoever had brought it up earlier, we have, you take an infested tree, cut it up, pile them up, and burn them. And when we say burn them, we don't need to reduce it to a pile of ash. Okay, all we're trying to do is raise the temperature enough that it kills all the beetles in there. And I mean, we even looked at some of the stuff that was burned last year. I mean, not even all the bark is burned off. I mean, there's still, a lot of them still have 70, 80, 90% of the bark on them. But it's still very effective. All you're trying to do is raise that temperature enough to kill the beetles in there. And so if you get it going good and hot, I mean, that's going to happen. Hopefully you get the burning windows to be able to do that. I mean, sometimes the last few years have been pretty good. But what did I miss here?
You missed the solar treatment.
I missed the solar treatment.
Go over the solar, then I'll do the cut.
Okay. The other one, and there's one that we call solarization, where you cut down the infested tree, lay it out on the ground, generally just in one layer of logs, 4 to 6 feet in length, and cover it in plastic. I'm going to say, we generally have not been recommending that. It's very effective if you do it right. And again, we're not trapping the beetles inside the plastic. That's not the point. They chew through bark, they can chew through plastic, they can chew through a lot of things. Okay, what we're trying to do is, again, raise that temperature in there and basically create a condition that is going to cook the beetles and kill the beetles in there. And it's very effective. It is very effective. We haven't really been recommending it because it's a lot more work and effort than what John's going to talk about with the cut and chunk. And, you know, in a lot of ways, the same thing with burning the piles. So.
Well, the cutting and chunking, and you'll note the time periods, we're looking at about mid-September. Why mid-September? Because up until then you can have newly infested trees, so why not wait until you've got everything that's attacked. And we cut it off on March 1st, and the reason for that is that if you cut them too late, and we'll get people to do, they'll say, well, I forgot, I'm going to cut it in June. It may not dry out enough to reduce the population enough to be effective. Now, again, we have seen it where people have gotten away with it, but it gets pretty iffy. If we say March 1st, then I know it's going to work all the time. If we go later, it depends on a lot of other factors. So if during the wintertime, if you're not able to get that wood to market, all right, that you're just going to have to leave it in place because of size, market, whatever. If you cut the tree, cut the trunk into about 2-foot lengths. The top we're not worried about. You got to cut it 2-foot lengths until the tree is about 5 inches in diameter. And 2 is a nice distance because if you can, and you don't have to, but if you can, come back at the end of May and just kick the logs. Because now what was on the bottom is on the top, and you'll dry out that as well. Again, are you going to kill all the beetles? No. And if you go look in May, you'll still a lot of live beetles underneath it. But what you'll also see is that they will die in time, most of them, and you will not see that pocket continually expand. As the gentleman had there with a pocket of 24. You don't do nothing in a pocket of 24, you should have had 200. All right, he had 6, all right, about 100 feet away or so. All right, well, that you kind of expect. I mean, nothing's going to be perfect. But if you say, I can't even roll it, that's fine. The ones on top are generally going to be killed almost 100%. The ones on the bottom, you'll have some survival, but generally what you're going to do is you're going to get the emerging population, you're going to kill off more than 80% of the beetles. Kill off more than 80% of the beetles. Now they're dispersing, they're not mass attacking. Yes, sir?
Once they attack the tree, how long before you start seeing the effects on the tree they've attacked?
All right, his question was, once they attack a tree, how long before you start seeing the effects? Well, the pitch massing, you ought to see when they're attacking the tree, because as they're burrowing in, the tree's pushing the pitch out. We call them green infested trees, though, because if you look at the canopy, you can't tell at all right now. They're just green trees. When you start seeing them color, they're getting ready to leave or they've left. And so the way we identify infested trees now, we always refer to them as green infested trees, because standing back, looking over this forest here, I couldn't tell you if anything's infested because the tops look fine. What we'd look is looking for pitch masses on the trunk, boring dust on the trunk, boring dust at the base of the ground, and that tells us the tree was successfully attacked. And those pitch masses will show up the day the beetle's attacking them. And same with the boring dust, because that occurs because of the activity of the attack. And here again, another example of the cutting and chunking. What the optimum length is, we don't know, but we know that 2 foot you can kick around pretty easy. And if you can do that, we've also had people that have cut them and split them, which is even better, put the bark side up, and you'll end up with almost 100% kill in those. And it's a great way of reducing the population, and it works as effectively as solar treatment. Our concern with the solar treatment, people out there are going to put plastic over these things, and we're going to have big plastic rolling through the forest. It's going to look like a garbage can out there, and we don't need that. But yeah, there they are drying out, dying away. Oh, that's my favorite picture. These are infested trees. The guy cut them in June. You can see the pitch globs on them. That was they were attacked the previous August. He cut them down, hauled them into Rapid City, stacked them between his live pine trees. This is where I do think they just crawled. I mean, literally here, you get up and say, why even fly? They put me right next door to it. This is a tree owner, I guess, that came under beetle control, carry us into town, put us next to live trees, do our bidding, human. All right, so don't do that. Oh, but can you spray? I like that picture because in the old days you could, but look how you had to dress. You know, there were chemicals in the good old days that you could pour on trunks of trees and kill everything inside. Yeah, you want to comment on that or not? No. You can't do that anymore. You probably wouldn't want people to do that anymore. So once the beetle's in, there's nothing you can spray. You can't do that either. Now, believe it, we get asked. There are people so upset, I think they'd accept a neutron bomb. If we said, you know what, there'll be some collateral damage, take out a few houses, maybe some tourists. Oh, go ahead, do it. All right, maybe your neighbor, that's fine, just go ahead and do it. Because they want to kill the beetles. The beetle attacks the trunk of the tree, right? So how are we going to spray an airplane overhead, have the chemical drift down and attach to the bark that thickly? Yes, ma'am.
I have a question. We border the National Forest Service, and we have a real steep hill in the back. The logging company came in, it's not ours, it's the Forest Service, but they came in, dropped a whole bunch of trees on that hill and let them lie, because they couldn't retrieve them because of the steepness of it. So they aren't cut up either, and if some of them are infested, will the bugs come out of those and go because they're not cut up?
I'll repeat the question. Now, the question was, and we have to repeat the question so that everybody can hear and he can pick it up as well. She abuts Forest Service property, and they came in and dropped trees in the infested trees in the Forest Service property. Okay. Well, and they may have just thinned. But at any rate, if they felled trees, would this have been recently? Okay. Let's say you have infested trees and you just felled them recently and you didn't cut them up. You might still get some kill on them. They have seen that in some places. We just recommend where all possible, get them into 2-foot lengths so they draw out even quicker. That's why I'm going to hand it over to the Forest Service guy.
Well, no, I don't. Yeah, do you know how big were the trees that they cut?
Oh, good question.
Were they? I mean, because, you know, a lot of times if they're just little trees, I mean, okay, then I don't, you know, I don't know. You'd have to see whether they're infested or not. I mean, I don't know whether they were, I mean, because if it's just little trees, it may be just a pre-commercial thing and they're just going through and dropping them and leaving them. If it's all sizes and bigger ones, it's harder to say for sure. You know, I mean, even leaving the whole tree there is going to kill a lot of the beetles in there, if there are any in there, but not as many, because it's just not going to dry out and heat up as much as smaller pieces. I mean, that's what we're trying to do is with the smaller pieces. That's one I'm not, I can't really answer. Huh? But you can call, are you in Custer? You can call the Forest Service office in Custer, and they'll let you either go in there and cut them up or whatever.
I think they're allowing landowners to go 100 feet or 200 feet
Yeah,
into the forest
yeah.
if they want to cut and chunk those. If they want to haul the wood off of there, they have to get a firewood permit.
Repeat it.
Yeah, and he just pointed out, and I should too. I mean, if like I said, you call the Forest Service office in Custer there, and they're generally allowing folks, you know, to go in 100 feet, couple hundred feet, whatever, and if you want to chunk them up or whatever, or take them out, and go ahead and do that. But you just have to call the office there in Custer.
The other item here you can do, and it does work. It works extremely well. It works darn near perfect. Is you can spray the trees individually. You can't spray them as a group. You can't do it from an aircraft. You got to do it from the ground. And this does work. I mean, we've had, most of you aren't going to spray 700 trees. We have had places where they sprayed 700 trees and they lose maybe one. So it's very effective. But the rules of spraying are such that you have to have a sprayer that's got 250 PSI, generally, even higher if you got bigger trees. Because you got to get all the way up that trunk to where it's down to 5 inches diameter, and you've got to penetrate the bark. You can't just miss the bark, and we've seen that as a problem with some people. All they do is wet the bark. You got to spray it till it's dripping off, which means you're getting it almost into the bark. So you got to have a good sprayer. We get people with these little hose end sprayers, forget it. Or these little sprayers that just kind of drizzle out, forget it. It's got to be a real good sprayer to get the height you need and the penetration you need. You also need to spray in May and June because you're putting the spray on to kill the beetles as they're going into the tree. Nothing's going to keep them from coming out of the tree. Question? All right, question, cost per tree from the commercial companies is running about $25 to $30 a tree, okay, depending on location, access, and that. Those are the ones that work. We have heard people charging as little as $3 a tree. You can probably guess the results. All right, so is it reasonable? I think so. If I had some 5 big trees around my house that I just did not want to lose, paying that money, and I will say you have to pay it every year. You know, it just protects for 1 year. And you might have an infestation around you for 5 years. So I always tell people, if you're going to spray, look at it as something you're going to be doing for a while rather than a one-time thing. It's not a vaccination. It is a spray. Yes, sir?
We sprayed 30 trees that averaged almost 20 inches in diameter, and the chemicals alone cost $12.
Yeah. Yeah, the chemicals can. But, I mean, it's a very competitive market when I've talked to the sprayers. And, oh, go ahead. Yeah. Yeah, Lawrence County does a program where they loan the sprayer out and you can buy the chemicals and do it yourself. Do-it-yourselfers, a couple things, let me remind you. First of all, and I'm sure you did, but that you buy a formulation that's for bark beetles. You can buy these chemicals which are not labeled for bark beetles. You need something that'll penetrate the bark. And it's either a carbaryl product or a permethrin product, a 7, which would be the carbaryl, or it would be like Astro, which is a permethrin, and those are both available as registered chemicals and also ones that the general public can buy. So you don't need an applicator's license to spray your own trees on your own property. If you came over to my house and sprayed, even though you could buy the chemical, if you're not a commercial applicator, you actually can't spray mine, even if you did it for a price of a beer. All right. Which one did you spray? Did you spray carbaryl or? All right. You sprayed carbaryl. And so what's the other thing you did before you sprayed the carbaryl? No, please. What's that? A lot of rain gear. No, I'm hoping to hear another word. No. I'm not worried about your health at all. You could have spread it out there in your underwear for all I care. All right. Didn't do that. All right. Just want to make that clear. He did not do that. Now, with 7, just a very important reminder if you're spraying 7, you got to buffer the water. You got to buffer the water. Water's got to be a pH of 7. If your water's alkaline, and it usually is, 7, 8, or 8, it breaks it down very quickly. And so if you're going to spray 7, make sure that you also buy the buffer and mix it into it and check the pH of your water source because its effectiveness is measured in minutes when you get very alkaline water. So. What's that? Astro, no. It's a little bit more pH tolerant, but that's always been the problem. I mean, one of my favorites was out here looking at where they sprayed 7, and they spread it on a whole bunch of trees, and they got good results in some and poor results in other. And I looked at it and I said, you started here and ended there, didn't you? And they go, yeah. I said, let's check the pH of your water. It was 8.2. So here it was still working. By the time they got there, it was not. So. Oh, yeah. Astro, the chemicals are not cheap. In fact, for some people, you may find it more cost-effective to hire someone than to do it yourself, depending on your ability, your interest, and that sort of stuff. But it has to be May and June because you want to do it before the beetles fly. The later you do it, the less effective it's going to be because the beetles are already in a tree. You're out of luck, right? So get it done early. Make sure you've got a sprayer that can actually get it. And yeah, Lawrence County does rent one or provides one. Yes, yes, sir.
Is it safe to assume that it's just going to kill any insect that lands on the bark, or is it an insect that goes into the bark?
Oh, good question. Does it kill anything that lands on the bark? Yeah, it's going to kill a lot of things. We did have the question in Rapid City, what about bees? 7 is deadly to bees. Depends on, do you like the bird? The 7, there's a little bit more, if you go through the literature, a little bit more problems associated with it. A little bit. I don't know about bats, but 250 PSI, you can probably knock them out of the sky. But the Astro has it's a nerve poison that only affects invertebrates. And so that's that one that a lot of people use if they're kind of concerned about about things. But both of them are good pesticides. They're
Very effective.
very effective. But yes, if you spray it on the bark of the tree, you'll find these labeled for other insects that you find in trees. If it's walking on the trunk, if it's walking on the trunk and it's an insect, it'll kill it. Let me make that clear. One other item. Oh, question first, sir.
I was told by a certain company a couple years ago that they could inject a chemical into the tree. Drill a little hole, inject it. If it was a tree I really wanted to save and it was infested with beetles, pine beetles, and it would save the tree. Does this work?
All right.
Practical.
His question was, or his comment was, he was told that there was a chemical you could inject it to a tree that was infested, if I heard you correctly, and it would kill the insects inside. No, it doesn't work. Now, by the way, there are chemicals labeled for that, but you don't have to prove effectiveness to label it for it. And believe me, if there were something you could inject in an infested tree and have it work, we'd be recommending it. And I used to be in business before I got my day job now. And it's injecting into trees on conifers that doesn't work very well. Deciduous trees it does. And so if you said, well, I heard they did this for bronze birch borer, you bet. Whole different tree, whole different insect. But for pines, because of that sap and that, we get very poor coverage of pesticides in the tree. So for pines, there's nothing you can pour around the base tree at this point in time or anything you can inject into a tree at this point in time that will kill insects that are already in a tree, nor are there any fungicides you can put in the tree. At this point in time, 2011. The only thing we can do is spray the tree. Now, the other thing, question, and then, okay. I was going to go on to this. Do you have a spray question?
I want to go back to the cut and chop.
Oh, okay.
Make sure I got it back. You cut them now, you lay them on the ground, you turn them one time in March,
May.
May.
Yep.
Let them set, turn them one time, and then that's it after.
Yep, his question, just get it right. And boy, I'd be thrilled if you did it right now. If you go out and cut and chunk your trees right now, they're just infested. That's going to give them longer to dry out, right? You cut the trees now, put them in a 2-foot lengths, the trunk of the tree in 2-foot lengths. And then next May, just go out and kick them so that the underside is now on the top. You'll achieve almost 100% kill in those. Very effective. What isn't effective is this. The insect, remember how we said they have a pheromone that they tell the beetles, come on here, attack me, attack this tree? Okay, everybody attack together? These beetles are not stupid. What if everybody comes to the party? Some of you have teenagers, or maybe you did this. You ever have it when you were a teenager and mom and dad went away for the weekend? That made your place the party place. And did you ever tell 5 or 10 of your friends, come on over to my house, my parents are gone, we'll have a party? Come on, I'm not the only one that did this, right? Please, all right? And then suddenly you notice you've got people spilling out into the road because they told their friends and their friends and their friends. Well, okay, good, I'm not alone in this, all right. All right, well, the beetles figured this out too. If everybody comes in and attacks that tree, we get so many beetles in it, they're not going to survive, are they? So the beetles, once the tree's full of beetles, the beetles that are there essentially put out a no vacancy sign and release a chemical and say, go find another tree, this one's full. Pretty cool, huh? Well, you can buy a synthetic form of that in a pouch and put it up on the tree, and that pouch emits that odor that says this tree's full. Too bad it didn't work, all right, because it doesn't. Now, some of you are going to say, well, I was on the internet, and it showed it worked in somewhere else. Some other places, sometimes it does. But in the Black Hills and some other locations, it's not been proven effective. And believe me, we've tried testing every new formulation they have, and under testing conditions, rather than saying, we just put it on a tree, it worked or it didn't. Believe me, I wish this would work for ponderosa pine, but right now you can't. In fact, I can show you pictures of trees ponderosa pines that are attacked and have the pouches right on them. So while you can buy them in Rapid City, all right, and it sounds great, and believe me, I wish they worked, they really don't.
I've got a very thin stand of pine trees on the property. I'm not in the forest, so to speak. I've got a tree that's got a large pitch mass about this high, one pitch mass,
Okay.
on a big ponderosa pine about that big around. And I want to know if that is in fact a mountain pine beetle, and then I know what to do beyond that. How do I determine to be sure that that is in fact, because you mentioned the other turpentine.
Sure,
and
sure,
engraver.
sure. And you know, there's, so he has a thin pine stand and a big tree with one
Only seen it on one tree.
large, really large pitch mass. And there's actually a lot of things that could be. And it's not mountain pine beetle. I would say that from your description. There's a lot of things that can cause that. One of them that we didn't, I guess, really talk about, there's they're called Zimmerman pine moss. If it's near a branch, where a branch is, there's a lot of those, and they produce, I mean, really big, I mean, even bigger than the turpentine beetles. I mean, really big pitch masses. Sometimes it can be just a wound on the tree will put out a big glob of pitch, but if it's just one and it's really big, that would not be a mountain pine beetle. Oh, man. Go ahead.
I've got about 3 1/4 acres, and right in the center of our property, there's about 5 or 6 trees, and it's mountain pine beetle. I even dug some out with this.
Sure.
Just check them out. And there's a few of them, like I say, probably about 5 of them that are really hit bad. I went around to the rest of our property, checked out all the rest of the trees. There weren't any other infected trees around. Yeah. So if they're not that good at flyers, where'd they come from?
Well, here, I'll start that.
Okay, you go. You can start that one.
His question was, if these aren't so good at flyers, where did they come from? And here's the possibility. They may have been there. But again, what it is, and we don't know that switch that clicks, where they go from just being this endemic population that goes out here, flies around, attacks a little bit here and there, to where they suddenly say, let's start massing attacking. And so it's not always a case that they weren't there, they just weren't there in high enough numbers.
There weren't any pitch tubes whatsoever.
Well, and again, sometimes you won't see that in that. So, and yes, indeed, we do get some. We always get some that come in from some distance. I mean, it certainly can come in from a mile or so. Again, they're not purposely flying to your place, but if they get dropped in, they'll attack. But quite often, it's not always a case that they just came in. It's just their numbers build up to the point that you're now getting some kills.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
Say, I was wondering, you were talking about spraying in May or June. What I'm contemplating, I haven't heard this, how long does it typically take for the beetle to get through the ball?
So your question is how long, you know, the beetle lands on a tree, starts chewing in. How long does it take a beetle to chew through the bark? You know, not very long, actually. I mean, you know, it'll actually spend more time kind of wandering around on the bark. Yeah, I mean, the live beetles wandering around on the bark, and I mean, once it decides, you know, however it comes to that decision, hey, yeah, this is a pretty cool tree. I mean, once it starts going in, I mean, it's in there, I mean, a matter of minutes, you know, at most.
But just real quick on that take here, I mean, I'll give you an example from yesterday. Yesterday we were doing some filming, or the day before, whatever, and I found a mountain pine beetle walking on the bark of a tree. I didn't have my camera, and I didn't have anything to put it in. No big deal. Walked back out to the car, got the camera, got the coffee cup, what the heck, that's what I'm going to put it in. Walked all the way back, there it was still walking on the bark. I knew I had that time to do it, all right, because they do kind of check out the tree first. And that's why spraying the tree works, because they don't just land and go, meow. They walk around. When they leave, they leave. And so, as Kurt says, when they're going into when they actually decide, you know what, good place to raise a family, they will burrow in. But everybody just kind of walks, checks out the neighborhood, you know, good place for the family, good schools.
Yeah. Okay.
2 more questions, and then we'll let Greg. Go ahead.
Go ahead. You. No.
The tree's dead.
Yeah. No. It's yeah. By the time they come out, the tree's dead, so it's not producing pitch anymore. Just go ahead. All right. You. It's.
Mention the question.
The question is altitude or elevation. Is, you know, how high up in the hills are you? Does that matter? Does that roughly answer? Yes and no. Okay, that's a poor answer. We are generally seeing them at the higher elevations. and generally not seeing them at lower elevations. Now, a lot of that has to do with just the way the forest grows. Higher elevation, the forest generally grows in thicker just because of more water and snow and everything like that. So it's better, generally speaking, it's a better place and there's more trees at higher elevations, which is why we see more beetles up there. It used to be back in the, my predecessors, a few removed, always had this old piece of mythology: we would never find mountain pine beetle south of Highway 16. That is no longer true. We see plenty of mountain pine beetles south of Highway 16, and which is also lower elevation. But what has changed over the last 50, 100 years south of Highway 16 is we've got a lot more trees down there than we used to. I mean, especially south of Highway 16. Used to be far more open. I mean, there weren't, it wasn't really dense forest there, historically. And as we've continued to gather trees, basically, and have more and more trees, which is what's causing the beetle epidemic, we're seeing it move even there. So, like I said, it's partially, there is an elevational thing with it. There is. But that's, a lot of it has to do with the way the forest grows. In some of the places where we have mountain pine beetle farther west and really higher elevations, the flight period is much more compressed at those higher elevations because they have a shorter growing season. Just overall, if you get up at 10,000 feet, you don't have long before when the snow is gone and before it snows again. And so you've got to have a very compressed flight, and so there's a much more, a much more synchronized flight up there. So there is, yes, there is something to the elevation thing. It certainly is.
A magic number.
Yeah, for here in the hills, I don't really have a good number to throw out there. But yes, if I was guessing, somewhere in the high 3,000s to 4,000 feet. I mean, but that's, please don't quote me on that. That is a very, very crude guess.